Okay, good afternoon, and welcome to Stories from the Archives. My name is Dean DeBolt, and I'm the archivist here. And over time, the Stories from the Archives is a series that we do where we talk about something in our collection that has led to a story, or we talk about things about West Florida or Pensacola. And today we're going to talk about a prominent Pensacola native, not a native, but a immigrant to Pensacola, Maxine. And Maxine has a very interesting story. The If World War II took on a grimmer aspect, a longer grimmer aspect in the 19 beginning of the 1940s, the Pensacola News Journal newspaper announced on January 31st, 1943, this was a month after Pearl Harbor, that each Sunday they would reproduce a local weekly letter of local happening, a special compilation column of the week's event that people could then clip out and mail to their men servicemen from Pensacola that were serving far away. And on February 21st, 1943, column of important news was it noted a prominent Pensacolian was taken by death during the week. Maxine the elephant, owned by W.C. Richards of the Pinehurst tourist camp, died Tuesday morning, apparently from a heart attack. Maxine was famous for predicting the outcome of the morning training flight of the cadets stationed at Softly Field. The 6,000-pound elephant was given a fitting funeral on a grassy knoll near her home. And that caught my eye when I was doing research, and I thought, what? Who is Maxine, and why would she be mentioned so prominently in the newspaper? And that led me on a journey that have been a lot of fun, because I have been able to track Maxine all over the United States. Now, what we know about Maxine is that she was born in India in 1919 and shipped to New York. She was sold by the wild animal importer Ellis S. Joseph in 1928 to W.C. Richards of Pensacola, Florida. At the time, she was 7 years old, weighed 820 pounds, and she was loaded on the steamer the Cherokee, and shipped to Jacksonville, Florida, and then from there to Pensacola. Now, Ellis Joseph, the guy who had sold her, was an animal importer, and he tried. I have a little history of him here. That he arrived in Perth, Australia, on June 22nd, 1912, and he had a collection of wild animals he'd captured in West Africa, and he tried to get a zoo. And he said he said in his uh, he said even in his note that this trip I captured 73 monkeys of various kinds, 16 deer, chimpanzees, eagles, ostriches, a mermaid, and that's interesting. A Cervalina, two bush pigs, 964 gray parrots, and other things, and a king penguin from uh, Kerguelen on the way to the South Pole. And he would sell these and import these animals and sell them to circuses all over the country. Now, Maxine with W.C. Richard, Wesley C. Richard, better known as W.C., he said in an interview in 1946 that his father was a showman in California, which is how he got his middle name, Cisco, from the city of San Francisco. He told a reporter he started in the business at 15 years old, eventually organized his own show, and traveled around the country. He said he was in Texas when Al Ringling told him he needed an elephant. And this began his experience of buying elephants, training them, using them in shows, and selling them to various places. The depression forced him to quit, and he moved to Pensacola, where he opened a Pinehurst tourist camp on Mobile Highway. Now, this is 3 miles west of Pensacola. And I mention that because it's outside of the city limit. And when you start doing research on Pensacola, built things outside of the city limit, you don't find anything. They're not listed in the city directories or the early telephone directories, things like that. It's very hard to find. But from newspaper accounts, we find that by 1933, Pinehurst Tourist Court that he had was Maxine the Elephant's home. Here he would teach her new tricks and train her, and during the summer and early fall, she would travel with truck circuses. And she would, and often he would drive her. Truck circuses were circuses that traveled by truck across the road. They generally were small circuses. They would go into a town, and the headline of their circus was the elephant that they had. And so WC would actually drive Maxine to the city or bring her back home. And sometimes he would actually travel and visit a circus to see that she was all right and reminisce with some of the carnies and roustabouts and other circus people that he had known when he traveled around. And every time she came back home, there'd be a little notice in the Pensacola newspaper that Escambia County's only elephant is back from her vacation. And when she came back, Richard would invite all the local children on Sunday to come out to the tourist camp and visit her and pet her and have ice cream and other kinds of things. She was an intelligent, friendly, and a gentle elephant who loved humans. By 1933, Maxine weighed 2,500 pounds. On March 21st, she was being taken by truck from San Antonio, Texas, back to Pensacola. The truck broke down in Gulfport, and Maxine was able to escape from the truck. All the newspaper accounts in four different states, because this was widely reported, that with nothing else to do, Maxine lumbered across the coast delta in search of excitement. Things were growing rather dull until she caught sight of Pierre Thury, a Mississippi coast painter and decorator, inspecting screens near Henderson Point. Diverted, she made an unsolicited attempt to join in the inspection, and the painter resented the intrusion. Shoo, he said, waving his arm, and Maxine, untutored in the rudiment of etiquette, ignored him. Shoo, he said again. One shoe was all right, but two shoes were bad, and that disturbed Maxine, and so she just put out her trunk, picked him up, tossed him 40 feet away. Now, Theory survived with only a leg bruise, but he had a story that he could tell for years. And it was reported that the trainer soon came up and picked up Maxine and took the chest and elephant back to his truck. But unfortunately, once the truck made it to the next town, it was raining. The truck skidded on an intersection and it threw Maxine against the side, breaking the body out of the truck. The Macon, Georgia newspaper reported it took a day to repair the truck, and many in Biloxi, where he was at the time, were startled to see by the elephant by the side of the road. The newspaper in Macon reported that this was Maxine's first visit to Biloxi, and Maxine stated that if the weather were better and there were more peanuts available, she'd like to stay longer. Although the Pensacola newspaper called this a stampede, Maxine nevertheless performed wonderfully 7 days later for a stag party held by the First Fleet Association, Branch 22 of Pensacola, the Pinehurst Tourist Camp. According to the report, three Navy chiefs tried to prove that the Navy feared nor man nor beast and tried to climb on her back, but she firmly tossed them off. During the summer, fall, and winter of 1933, Maxine toured with the K Brothers Wild Animal Circus, where she was billed as Maxine the Singing Elephant and occasionally Maxine the Dancing Elephant during their New England tour. Among the cities visited were Glen Falls, New York, Meridian, Connecticut, and the circus traveled down the eastern seaboard, eventually to Fort Lauderdale. The newspapers reported her coming home to Pensacola on March 16th and her formal return on March 17th. And these were a couple of ads from some of the different newspapers about Maxine with the K Brothers Wild Animal Circus and how important the Maxine, the singing elephant, was to the circus coming to town. She returned to the K Brothers Circus for 1934, and W.C. Richard was driving her to Concord, Massachusetts, when an axle broke on his truck in Pottsville, Pennsylvania. And while the truck was being repaired, he had Maxine put on a show for the neighborhood kid where she danced, played a mouth organ, and other tricks. The popular newspaper called it His Misfortune Was the Kid's Good Luck. And I found a picture of the traveling truck circus in the article out of the Parkville, Pennsylvania about Maxine. In 1935, she traveled with the Barney Brothers Ring Circus in the Midwest. They billed her as the largest elephant in captivity, even bigger than the famed Jumbo. She traveled throughout the Midwest, including Iowa, North Dakota, Arkansas, and Missouri, and she later returned to Pensacola in November of 1935, and again a party was held for Maxine. Um, and every year the pattern repeated. Of course, by now, by 1935, the 800 pound elephant now weighed close to 4,300 pounds. But every year the pattern repeated. She would winter at home in Pensacola, travel with the circuses, learn new tricks, endear herself to trainer, children, circus people, and others. She was credited with saving at least three lives in her career. Once in northern Tennessee, the truck in which she was transported fell 50 feet into a river. Maxine battered her way out of the rear compartment, swam up to the cab, burst open the door. She carried the half-drowned driver to the bank, surprising a party of picnickers. Once at the tourist camp, a keeper fell asleep with a cigarette in his hand, and pretty soon a pile of hay nearby was in flames. Maxine picked up the keeper, tossed him 20 feet out of danger, broke out of her own chain, and beat it for safety. The third rescue occurred on circus grounds, and I found where there was a 4-year-old girl, and the crowd got excited by some fire trucks speeding past the fairground, and the child ran from her parents into a line of elephants. And Maxine reached the child, lifted her 10 feet in the air with her trunk to prevent her from being crushed by others. Now, what made Maxine such a national phenomenon was that the hallmark of the circus, of course, was the elephant. And many of the traveling circuses which visited small towns and real elephants would have one elephant, and that was Maxine. And she would garner affection by charming folk with her tricks and friendliness, but she was very intelligent, and she did have a mind of her own. In 1941, a trainer decided to tease her by holding out a loaf of bread, just holding it within sniffing distance, but just out of her reach. It probably wasn't the first time this trainer had done it, and she had a grudge against him. But what the trainer didn't know was Maxine had figured out how to get out of her chains. So when he waved the bread, she got mad, trumpeted, stepped out of her chain, slapped him neatly across the face with her trunk, and wandered off. She began ripping boards off a nearby garage, and finally the trainer apologized to her satisfaction and let him lead her back to her stall. The circus owner had to pay the damages for the garage and invest in some new and stronger chain. This delay was printed in a number of Louisiana and Florida newspapers, with the best headline I thought was Maxine Gets Tough and Cost the Boss Several Greenbacks. The fall of 1941-1942, Maxine toured with the Jay Gould Circus. She was billed as the elephant with the human brain. Now, the interesting thing about the Mills Brothers Circus is they advertised themselves as a clean circus, and they performed primarily outdoors with no need for tents. Maxine was the star of the show, and in rural town, the circus would issue a challenge for people to have a tug of war with any tractor dealer. And this was an ad for her with the Mill Brothers Circus in 1940. This is the newspaper clipping that I found about Maxine Get Tough and Cost the Boss several bucks from different newspapers about the elephant causing some damage. Jay Gould's outdoor circus and also the Mill Brothers Circus worked with local chambers of commerce as sponsor, and partnered with local organization for fundraising. This was really a brand new innovation in the world of the circus entertainment. So here our ad for her with the Jay Gould Circus, and also I like this one because this is one of her tug of wars. When they came to town, they would advertise tug of war with Maxine or with students or with a local tractor, for example. She was part of the circus for the Soybean and Corn Festival in Gibson City, Illinois in early October 1941, and she was at the Old King Coal Festival in West Frankfort, Illinois in mid-October, where she was the elephant mascot of the festival. Now, unfortunately, the evening before the circus was to close, she got loose from the circus and wandered a block away where she discovered a feed store. And she pushed back the door and, according to the owner, consumed huge quantities of feed. The owner demanded the police arrest her, which they did, leading to headlines in Illinois and Kentucky newspaper about what to do with a 4-ton elephant in the city jail. One of the events staged during the circus run in 1942 was the surprise birthday party with Maxine. And they would have often held for the children, as she was 23 years old, 1942, and for they would have a circus parade in any of the rural communities that the circus visited. Maxine, of course, being the star of the parade. And in 19 and then they would have a birthday party with her. I found a 1944 Clarksville, Tennessee newspaper where they had short stories about men in service. One of the men in service, Wilbur R. Larson, told about his life as an elephant trainer with the Jay Gould Circus. He had only one accident with an elephant, and it was Maxine. It said he and Maxine teamed up in a head-carrying act. That is, I guess she carried him with her trunk wrapped around his head, and she slipped, and his head cut his head, leaving 2 scars on the back of his skull. He was ready to do the trick again the next night, but it took 2 weeks to convince Maxine that the trick was safe. She was too nervous to try it. Larson also told people that he often fed Maxine bottled soft drink, that she drank straight from the bottle. And one night in Sparta, Illinois, she crashed a crew beer party and drank a great deal from an open keg of beer. Larson said they kept giving her more and more beer until she began staggering around. He told the paper she probably had quite a hangover with dreams of pink men. In 1942, season closed with the Jay Gould Million Dollar Circus, ended its season in Mount Carmel, Illinois on October 7, 1942. Billboard magazine reported they had toured for 20 weeks, played in 60 towns. 40 members of their company entered the armed force services, and that was the end of the circus. But she had her yearly birthday party with children bringing scrap metal, which resulted in a huge, large pile on the lawn of the county courthouse, and she returned to home to Pensacola for the winter. Now, in Pensacola, the pace of training in naval aviators increased during the 1940s, and especially after Pearl Harbor. Each morning, the Naval Aviation cadets in Pensacola would be loaded up at Pensacola Naval Air Station, and they would be bused up what we call Mobile Highway to the field where they would practice flight training. Every morning, they would pass this Pinehurst tourist camp, and Maxine would be outside in this giant corral where they could see her, and they would wave and they would yell and they would get her attention. And they discovered that if she lifted her trunk to them, they would have what were called up checks. In other words, perfect score for their lesson that day. But if she didn't lift her trunk, if she kind of turned around and presented her posterior to them, they would have a really bad day. And so to the to aviators, she became known as their flight barometer, telling them where they would have good days and their bad days. Maxine died suddenly on February 16, 1943, of a heart ailment or heart attack. Newspapers in Tampa, Pensacola, St. Petersburg reported that there was gloom at Softly Field. Owner W.C. Richard offered Maxine 6,000 pound carcass uh, to the Red Cross as a contribution for their campaign for fats and oils. This was one of the campaigns that they did. But they declined because they had no ability, local Red Cross had no ability or facility to uh, cut up a 300-pound elephant. Richard told Billboard magazine he'd had Maxine for 19 years and she weighed 800 pounds when he originally got her. Richard had union carpenter build Maxine's coffin. It was 18 feet long, 12 feet wide, and 14 feet deep, and she was buried on a grassy knoll at or near Pinehurst Tourist Camp with a tombstone and faced in. As the paper reported, roses will adorn her grave as they were her favorite flower, and she once pulled up 20 rose bushes that had been brought from Texas for the Richards lawn and ate them, briars and all. And so that gave our story to why there was a column in the paper telling the servicemen of the death of their favorite elephant. But that's hardly the end of our story. The story of Maxine inspired Elizabeth Dean, who was the wife of Commander A.M. Dean, United States Navy, to write a story about Maxine set at a tourist camp and telling the story about the daily bus, the naval cadets, and their hope of Maxine's blessing for a good day. And the story Maxine and the Marvelous Babe was published in Collier's Magazine on October 16, 1943. Although fiction, it incorporates key details about Maxine as well as her love of roses in a romantic tale where the elephant helps a naval aviator realize his dream date is not at all a dream. This led to another story. And so on November 17th, 1945, in Saturday Evening Post, Elizabeth Dean published Maxine and the Pretty Bauble. Again, set amid Maxine and her life at the tourist camp titled Navy Nook. A final story about Maxine appeared in American magazine uh, in May 1948, titled Operation Shinny, a tale of a naval cadet, a girl he loves, the father who disapproves, and an elephant that helped put out his car fire before making off with his shiny camp. Richards acquired and trained many other elephants, but sold them all by 1948. He died in 1950, but a newspaper interview in 1946 made it clear that Maxine had been his favorite. And so someday when the archaeology program at the University of West Florida or somebody unwittingly discovers bones of an elephant in West Florida and start talking about all the mastodons that must have roamed along the beach, maybe we'll remember the escapades of Maxine, one of the most loving and largest residents that Pensacola ever had. Thank you very much.